My name is Hannah. I am 36 years old, and this is the story of the day my entire world shifted inside a lawyer's office. It began with rain, not the soft, forgiving kind, but sheets of cold water that came sideways, slapping against the windshield like the world itself wanted me to turn back. I remember gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned pale, my chest rising too fast, my thoughts tangled between fear and stubbornness. Outside the car window, the building stood still. Whitman and Ellis, the law firm tucked downtown between the gray towers of Boston. It looked intimidating, too polished, like it was daring me to step inside and face what I had been running from for years. That morning, I wasn't just battling the storm. I was battling the ghost of a marriage that had left me hollow. Logan, my ex-husband, was inside that building. And so was she, Sierra, the woman he replaced me with, the one who had become the face of every late-night meeting, every unexplained trip, every perfume I never wore. But it wasn't only Sierra. She would be holding something more permanent, more painful than any whispered affair. A child. Their child. The weight of that truth sat heavy in my stomach, twisting like a knife. I had imagined this scene 100 times the day I would finally see her, not as a shadow in my imagination, but as flesh and blood standing beside the man who had erased me. And now the storm outside mirrored the storm inside me, loud, relentless, impossible to ignore. But this wasn't just about him or her. This was about Margaret. My former mother-in-law, the woman who was never really mine by law, but always mine by heart. Margaret had been the one person in that family who truly saw me. She had the kind of wisdom that slipped into you quietly, over a teacup, over silence, that spoke louder than lectures. And now she was gone. 4 days earlier, she had left this world, and today was the reading of her will. I could have stayed home. I could have said it was none of my business. After all, why should a woman like me, discarded, forgotten, show up for an inheritance that was never promised? But it wasn't about the money. It was about closure. It was about honoring the woman who once held my hand through the wreckage of a crumbling marriage and whispered, "You are stronger than you think." The wipers groaned across the glass, failing to clear the rain, as if even the car wanted to keep me hidden. My dress clung to me like armor black, not for mourning, but for protection. I knew walking in there would be like stepping into enemy territory. Logan's eyes cold and polished. Sierra's lips curved into victory. The baby bundled like a trophy. And me, the ghost who never quite belonged. Yet something rooted me to the moment, Margaret's voice in my memory, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders in that sunroom, her eyes holding mine steady. That memory gave me the courage to open the car door. The rain hit me immediately, soaking the hem of my dress, whipping my hair across my face. My heels clicked against the slick pavement, each step echoing louder than the storm itself. And then I saw him, Logan under the overhang, immaculate in a navy suit tie, knotted with precision. Beside him, Sierra, younger, flawless, untouched by the weather, holding the baby as if she had already won. Our eyes met. His face didn't move. Hers smiled. And mine hardened because I knew this wasn't just a reading of a will. This was a reckoning. I walked past them, past the judgment in their eyes, past the silence he wrapped around himself like a second suit. I walked into that building because whether they wanted me there or not, I had earned my place. And what none of us knew then, what only Margaret knew, was that this storm wasn't here to drown me. It was here to wash everything clean. I stepped deeper into the law firm, shaking the storm from my umbrella, though the rain still clung to my skin. The receptionist glanced up, polite but distant, her voice a whisper in the quiet hall. Here for the Bennett estate? I nodded, signing my name with a hand that trembled just slightly. My heels sank into the thick carpet as I followed the assistant down a long corridor. Each step felt heavier, like I was walking into a place where the air itself carried judgment. And as I walked, my thoughts drifted back, not to Logan, not even to Sierra, but to Margaret. Because truthfully, that was the only reason I was there. Margaret Bennett, my former mother-in-law, though I never once thought of her in those terms. She was not bound to me by blood, yet she had been more of a mother than the one I was born to. She had this way of making space without ever demanding it. She never shouted, never tried to overpower the room. She simply listened. And somehow in her quiet presence, I felt heard more than I ever did with Logan. I remembered evenings in her sunroom, the light fading against lace curtains, her shawl wrapped neatly around her shoulders. She would pour chamomile tea always with the same soft grace and slide the cup toward me like it was an offering. And in those moments when I felt invisible in my own marriage, she would glance at me as if to say, "I see you." You can't fake that. You can't fabricate the kind of recognition she gave me. In a family where appearances were everything, Margaret was different. She didn't care about the galas, the handshakes, the carefully polished smiles. She cared about what was left when the lights went out and the guests had gone home. And more than once, she saw me in that raw, tired space when I no longer had the strength to pretend. That was why I came. Not for money, not for property, not for a line in a legal document. I came because she had once told me in her quiet way that I mattered. And even now, with her gone, I needed to believe that was still true. I thought about the last time we spoke, her voice thin but steady over the phone. "Whatever happens, Hannah, remember this, you mattered to me." Those words had felt like a thread to cling to, and now walking into this room, I held on to them like a lifeline. Because the truth is, I didn't belong there in their eyes. To Logan, I was the past. To Sierra, I was the ghost she had already replaced. But to Margaret, I was something more. That mattered. And maybe today would prove it. So as the assistant opened the door to the conference room, I hesitated at the threshold. Across the mahogany table, Logan and Sierra were already seated. Logan leaned back, exuding that familiar superiority, ankle crossed over his knee. Sierra adjusted the baby's blanket, with the kind of flourish only meant to be seen. They looked complete, like a new portrait of a family. And me, I was the shadow they thought had been erased. I took a breath, then I stepped inside. And maybe this is the moment where I should pause and ask you something. Because I know I'm not the only one who has walked into a room where it felt like you no longer belonged. Maybe for you it wasn't a will reading. Maybe it was a wedding you weren't invited to sit near the front. Or a family dinner where your seat had been quietly given to someone else. If you've ever felt that sting, that ache of invisibility, I want you to tell me in the comments. Share your story, because stories like these don't just belong to me. They belong to all of us. And if you're listening right now, if you've ever had to rebuild your dignity from scraps, then don't just watch this story. Be part of it. Tap like, hit subscribe, and stay here with me. Because what happens next will show you just how much one quiet woman's choice can change everything. I pulled out a chair at the far end of the table, the leather cold against my back. Logan didn't greet me. Sierra smiled with the kind of sweetness that carried poison. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the wreckage surrounding him. And me, I folded my hands, lifted my chin, and prepared to listen. Because this wasn't just a will reading, this was Margaret's last word. The hum of the air conditioning filled the silence as I sat down. My damp dress clung to my legs, my hair still wet from the storm outside. Across the table, Logan tapped his fingers against the wood, a gesture I knew too well. It was the same rhythm he used at dinner parties, when he was pretending to be patient, the same rhythm that had once set my teeth on edge when I asked questions he didn't want to answer. He didn't look at me directly. To him, I was already dismissed. And yet I felt something different inside me, an unexpected calm. Because I wasn't here for him. I wasn't even here for whatever would be read from that folder lying closed in front of the attorney. I had come for one reason, only Margaret. I knew better than to expect an inheritance. I was no longer her daughter-in-law by law. To the rest of the Bennett family, I was a chapter closed, a name erased. But Margaret, she had always been different. She didn't measure connection by paperwork. She didn't measure loyalty by blood. She measured it by presence, who showed up, who listened, who carried truth quietly without needing recognition. That was why I had come. Not because I thought my name would be on a line of assets or property. I had no illusions. Instead, I came because I owed her. I came because even if the world considered me an outsider, she had made me feel like family. And you don't walk away from that kind of love. Not even after death. I remembered one particular night. It was raining just like today. Logan had called to cancel dinner, no excuse offered, no apology given. I drove to Margaret's house, soaked through, ashamed of how easily I had been dismissed. She didn't scold me. She didn't ask questions. She simply opened the door, handed me a towel, and said, "You deserve more than waiting rooms and empty apologies." That night we ate grilled cheese sandwiches and watched a documentary about glaciers. She told me how glaciers move so slowly, no one notices, until the entire landscape has changed. I didn't understand it then, but sitting here now, staring at Logan and Sierra across this table, I realized Margaret had been teaching me all along. Quietly, steadily, she had been helping me find the strength to change my own landscape. So no, I wasn't here for property. I wasn't here to take something from Logan or to prove a point to Sierra. I was here to close the circle, to honor the woman who never raised her voice yet spoke the loudest truths. And maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've shown up to something not because you were promised anything, but because your heart told you it was right. Have you ever walked into a room knowing you didn't belong on paper, but you went anyway because you couldn't bear to leave something unfinished? Tell me in the comments. I want to know how you faced it, because stories like that carry strength for all of us. Logan shifted in his seat, adjusting his tie like it was suddenly too tight. Sierra rocked the baby slightly, though the child was already sleeping soundly. I noticed the way she glanced at me, the flicker of irritation she tried to hide. She wanted me to feel small, insignificant. She wanted me to remember that in their eyes I was a ghost. But ghosts don't sit at tables like this. Ghosts don't breathe in the same air and look people straight in the eye. I was there, present, solid. Whether they acknowledged it or not, Margaret had left me a place in this room. I folded my hands in my lap and inhaled. The smell of polished wood and old books filled the space, mixing with the faint, powdery scent of Sierra's perfume. I let it ground me. I thought of Margaret's last phone call again. "You mattered to me." Those 4 words were enough to steady me now. Whatever was inside that folder, it didn't matter. I wasn't there to collect. I wasn't there to compete. I was there because Margaret had once carried me through silence and made sure I knew I had worth. And even if all I received today was a moment of her recognition, that would be enough. The attorney cleared his throat, preparing his notes. Logan leaned forward, ready to receive what he believed was his. Sierra straightened her back, anticipation written across her smile. And me, I sat still, calm, waiting. Because closure doesn't come from possessions. It comes from being brave enough to sit in the room where others think you don't belong, and staying, when the silence in that room was thick enough to choke on. The long mahogany table gleamed under the overhead light, and I could hear the faint ticking of a clock on the far wall. Logan leaned back, one arm draped across the chair as if he owned the air we breathed. It was a posture I knew too well, polished, confident, dismissive. He had perfected that look in boardrooms and fundraisers, the look that told everyone else they were just a detail in his story. And then there was Sierra. She sat with her back straight, every hair in place, her lipstick immaculate. The baby bundled in silk and fleece lay nestled against her chest. Her hand rested lightly on Logan's arm, an unspoken declaration of possession. When she turned to me, her smile wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile you give a cashier you'll never see again, sweet, condescending, final. "Camille," she said lightly, as if we were old friends meeting for brunch. "You look, well..." I didn't answer. I didn't give her what she wanted, acknowledgement, recognition, or worse, validation. I simply lifted my chin, let the words fall between us, and remained silent. But inside the storm I had walked through an hour earlier roared again. Seeing them together was a wound ripped open. The late-night meetings, the unexplained absences, the perfume that wasn't mine, it had all been her. And now, here she was, holding in her arms the life that had been dangled in front of me, but never given. For a moment, I felt the ache of what could have been. I had once dreamed of sitting in that very seat with a child of my own. but those dreams had crumbled long before the ink dried on the divorce papers. Logan finally looked at me. His eyes were cool, calculated, the same eyes he used when he wanted me to know I was a problem he didn't have time to solve. "You didn't have to come," he said flatly. "Mom wouldn't have expected it." I met his gaze steady. Maybe not, but I came anyway. A flicker crossed his face, annoyance, maybe surprise, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. He tapped his fingers against the table again, feigning control. Sierra shifted the baby, rocking him gently, though he hadn't stirred. It was a performance. Everything about them was performance. And I was meant to be the audience, the forgotten ex-wife, the woman who no longer mattered. For one heartbeat, I nearly let them win. I almost believed I didn't belong in that chair. I almost let the humiliation creep into my bones. But then, as if whispered through the silence, I remembered Margaret, her hand on mine, her voice in that sunroom. "You are stronger than you think, Camille." I breathed in. I let the shame burn away, replaced with something steadier. They could play their parts, but I wouldn't be written out of this story, not today. So I leaned back in my chair, folded my hands in my lap, and gave them nothing. No anger, no tears, no cracks to exploit, just calm. It unsettled Sierra. I could see it in the way her smile wavered at the edges. She had expected me to crumble, to look small in comparison to her youth, her beauty, her child. But I didn't. I sat tall. And that silence between us, my silence was louder than anything she could perform. Logan glanced at his Rolex, tapping the crystal face like the time was too precious to waste on me. But when he looked back up, he found the same thing Sierra did. I wasn't broken. I was present. And sometimes presence is the sharpest kind of defiance. If you've ever sat in a room where people wanted you gone, you know that feeling. That ache to shrink, to excuse yourself, to disappear. But here's what I've learned when they expect you to vanish. The bravest thing you can do is stay. And maybe you've been there too. Tell me in the comments, have you ever had to sit through humiliation just to prove to yourself you were still whole? The door opened. The attorney stepped inside, briefcase in hand. "Thank you all for coming," he said, adjusting his glasses. "Let's begin." Logan leaned back farther, ankle crossed over his knee, smug certainty radiating from his posture. Sierra's eyes glittered with expectation. And me, I kept my chin high, my heart steady, and waited. Because humiliation is only power if you let it pierce you. And I had already decided today nothing would pierce. The door clicked shut behind the attorney, sealing us in. The conference room felt less like a space for legal matters and more like a stage built for intimidation. Dark oak shelves lined the walls, stacked with books whose spines had not been touched in years. The carpet muted every sound, except the small shuffle of papers the attorney placed before him. And at the center of it, all the long mahogany table stretched like a battlefield, where silence was the first weapon. I could feel the weight of power in that room. It wasn't loud, it wasn't chaotic, it whispered. Logan understood that kind of silence. He leaned back, ankle crossed over his knee-eyes, flicking to the attorney with the smug patience of someone who had already written the ending of the story in his mind. He believed this was his day, his inheritance, his legacy. His posture said it all. "I deserve this." Beside him, Sierra played her part beautifully. Her silk scarf draped like a trophy, her earrings catching the light as she shifted. She adjusted the baby's blanket with deliberate care, her other hand resting lightly on Logan's sleeve. It wasn't just a touch, it was a performance. She wanted me to see her as the woman in his life now. The rightful place filled the chapter of me erased. And I knew they thought I didn't belong, that I was the intruder in their victory lap. But what they didn't understand is that power in a room like this isn't always about who looks the part. Sometimes it's about who refuses to flinch. I sat at the opposite end, deliberately far but not distant. I folded my hands neatly, eyes steady, body calm. I wouldn't give them a crack to slip through, let them have their show. I knew Margaret, and Margaret never wasted her words. She had chosen silence when others filled the air with noise. And if she had left me a seat here, then it meant she had something to say, something they weren't prepared to hear. The attorney cleared his throat, eyes sweeping across us. We're here today for the formal reading of the last will and testament of Margaret Elizabeth Bennet. His voice was steady, professional, but I caught the faintest flicker in his gaze when it passed over me. Not sympathy, not pity. Recognition. Sierra leaned forward, smiling politely, though her words dripped with unease. Just to clarify, Margaret didn't leave any surprises, did she? Everything goes to Logan, correct? The attorney's smile was professional, his answer measured. All details will be addressed in the formal reading, Miss James. Sierra leaned back, her irritation flickering at the corners of her perfect expression. Logan didn't correct her. Of course he didn't. He believed he didn't need to. In his mind, everything in this room was already his. I glanced at him, at the practiced ease with which he wore entitlement. He had always carried himself this way, dinners, galas, even our own home. But what he never noticed was that confidence built on performance cracks the moment it's tested. And this was about to be tested. The attorney opened the folder, the sound of paper slicing the silence like a blade. My heart thudded once sharp, then steadied. Whatever came next, I was ready, because Margaret's voice was about to echo through this room, and I had no doubt it would land exactly where it needed to. And maybe I should pause here, because if you're still with me, you already know this isn't just about money or property. It's about presence. It's about dignity. If you've ever been told you don't belong, if you've ever been erased by people who thought they owned the ending of your story, stay here with me. Tap subscribe, join this community, and let's prove that silence can be louder than any performance. The attorney adjusted his glasses, poised to begin. Logan smirked faintly. Sierra smoothed her scarf. And me, I leaned back calm, knowing Margaret's choice was about to tilt the entire room. Because in places like this, true power doesn't roar. It waits. The shuffle of papers began. The attorney adjusted his glasses, his voice steady as he explained the legal formalities, the clauses, the witness signatures. Logan leaned back farther, fingers drumming lazily against the arm of his chair. To him, this was all theater, a formality before the grand reveal of what he thought was his by birthright. Sierra tilted her head, pretending to listen, but her eyes kept darting to the folder, hungry, restless. I sat in silence, listening to the rhythm of their anticipation. It was almost amusing watching them wrap themselves tighter in certainty. They had built their fantasy brick by brick, Logan, the grieving son receiving his legacy. Sierra, the young partner, elevated by proximity. The baby, a symbol of continuity. And me, reduced to a shadow in the background. Let them believe it, I thought. Sometimes the sweetest justice is letting someone march confidently toward a cliff they can't see. The attorney paused suddenly. He closed the folder, laced his fingers together, and cleared his throat. The sound cut through the room like a bell. There is something you should all know before I continue, he said. His eyes moved from Logan to Sierra, then finally lingered on me. Margaret left behind a personal letter. Logan stiffened. A letter. Yes, the attorney replied, his tone deliberate. It was sealed and delivered to this office 2 days before her passing, with instructions that it be read aloud, but only after the will itself has been fully disclosed. Sierra's brows shot up, her voice quick and sharp. Read aloud, to everyone. The attorney nodded. That was Margaret's request. The silence that followed was a different kind of silence. Heavy. Pressing. Logan's jaw clenched, a vein in his temple pulsing. He was calculating now, running through every possibility of what his mother might have written. Sierra leaned toward him, whispering urgently, her hand clutching his arm, like she could stop the storm already rolling in. And for the first time I saw something I had never seen in Logan before. Fear. It wasn't fear of me. It wasn't even fear of losing the estate. It was fear of Margaret's voice. Because Margaret never wasted her words. If she had chosen to leave a letter, it meant there was something she wanted known, something she wanted spoken aloud, with no room left for spin or denial. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded, my heart beating in a steady rhythm. I didn't fidget. I didn't look away. I let them stew in the silence because I understood what Logan didn't yet. Margaret had always played the long game. And here was the truth, the will wasn't the final act. The letter was. I thought back to the last afternoon I spent with her, sunlight slanting through her sunroom, the faint smell of chamomile in the air. Her voice was thin but steady as she told me, "You always carry the weight of other people's comfort. Maybe it's time someone carried yours." I had thought she was just being kind, but now hearing about the letter I understood. She had been preparing me. Across the table, Sierra adjusted the baby's blanket again, though her movements were jerky now, her polished mask slipping. Logan's fingers twitched against the table. Their confidence was cracking. The attorney placed the cream-colored envelope aside, my name written across it in Margaret's familiar slanted handwriting. Just my name, not Mrs. Bennet, not former daughter-in-law, just Hannah. And that simplicity struck deeper than anything else. Because Margaret saw me as myself, not as an extension of Logan, not as someone defined by marriage or divorce, just me. And that I realized was already more valuable than anything listed in the will. If you've ever had someone speak truth over your life, if you've ever been seen when the rest of the world looked away, then you know the power of what that envelope meant. Tell me in the comments, has anyone ever given you a gift that wasn't money or property, but recognition? Because sometimes that's what changes us most. I lifted my eyes, meeting Logan's across the table. He didn't look smug anymore. His face was tight, his eyes sharp with worry. For once, he wasn't in control. And that was Margaret's first victory of the day. The attorney reopened the folder, his hands steady, his voice, sliding back into the rhythm of legal language. As executor of the estate of Margaret Elizabeth Bennet, he began, I will now read the allocation of assets as stated in her final will and testament. The room shifted. Logan leaned forward now, no longer feigning disinterest. His hands clasped together on the table, his entire body leaning toward the attorney like he could pull the words closer. Sierra adjusted her scarf, the emerald studs at her ears catching the light. She smoothed the baby's blanket again, her movements quick, impatient. The attorney's eyes moved across the page. His tone was even almost detached, but the words themselves were anything but ordinary. To my son Logan James Bennet, I leave the portrait of his late father currently displayed in the study of my Boston home. The air snapped. Sierra inhaled sharply as though someone had just pulled the rug out from under her chair. Logan blinked, a muscle in his jaw twitching. A portrait, that was it. I sat still, my pulse steady. The attorney continued. To Miss Sierra James, no specific bequest is made. Her smile broke then, just slightly. The mask faltered. Her lips parted, but no words came. She sat there holding the baby as if clutching an anchor, her cheeks flushed with disbelief. And then the attorney turned the page. And to Camille Ann Bennet, he said, his voice carrying weight now, deliberate and clear, I leave the entirety of my estate. The words hung in the air like thunder. For a moment, none of us breathed. The rain outside hammered harder against the windows, as though echoing the storm that had just broken loose inside the room. I didn't move, I didn't smile, I didn't even blink. Because in that instant the world shifted. The attorney listed it all, his voice calm against the rising tide of chaos. The home on Beacon Hill, the lakeside cottage in Vermont, 2 investment accounts, all heirloom jewelry, and all remaining physical and digital assets to Camille Ann Bennet. The clock on the wall ticked. The cars outside moved faintly through the streets. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. Sierra found her voice first. This has to be a mistake, she snapped, turning to Logan. She wouldn't do this. She couldn't. Logan's chair creaked as he straightened. His face was pale, eyes wide with disbelief, then dark with anger. Read it again, he demanded, his voice sharp. There is no mistake, the attorney replied calmly, turning to the notarized page. This will was updated and signed 6 weeks before Margaret's passing in the presence of 2 legal witnesses. Logan's composure cracked. His hands tightened on the table. She didn't tell me she was changing anything, he muttered almost to himself. She wasn't required to, the attorney answered simply. Sierra turned back to me, her face twisted, her voice trembling. You're not even family anymore. Why would she give everything to you? I looked at her, my voice steady. Because I wasn't just a daughter-in-law to her. She made that clear long before today. And in that moment, the silence was mine. Have you ever seen someone's certainty crumble in front of them? Have you ever watched entitlement dissolve the moment truth shows up? It's a strange thing, both heavy and freeing. Tell me in the comments, have you ever witnessed someone shocked by a truth they thought they could control? Logan exhaled harshly, running a hand through his hair. Sierra sat stiff, clutching the baby so tightly the child began to stir. The attorney set the folder down, the finality in the gesture sealing Margaret's words into the air. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat, remembering her last phone call. You mattered to me. Now I understood what she meant. Because this wasn't just an inheritance. This was her last act of defiance, her final gift, her truth written into law. And it had all been left in my hands. Even the silence after the words settled was unlike anything I had ever known. It wasn't stillness, it wasn't calm, it was the kind of silence that trembles, waiting to fracture into chaos. And right on cue, Logan snapped first. He shoved his chair back, the scrape of wood against carpet, echoing too loud in the heavy room. This is insane, he barked, his voice shaking with a fury he was desperate to hide. She must have been confused. Camille hadn't even seen her in weeks. She saw enough, I said quietly. The words slipped out steady, not sharp, but they landed like a strike. His head whipped toward me, eyes blazing. For a heartbeat, I saw the man I once married. The man who had rehearsed every smile, every handshake, every promise, but the mask was gone. What remained was raw panic. Sierra leaned in, her tone a mix of desperation and venom. No, she would never just hand everything over to someone who isn't even family anymore. Her voice cracked on the word family, as if spitting it at me could make it true for her and false for me. I turned my gaze toward her, measured and calm. I was never just family on paper. Margaret chose me long before today. The baby whimpered in her arms, startled by the tremor in her voice. She rocked him too quickly, her movements jerky, like her polished veneer was unraveling one thread at a time. Logan stepped closer to the attorney, pointing a trembling finger at the document. She wasn't well. She had been in and out of treatment. How do we know she wasn't pressured? The attorney didn't flinch. This will was legally notarized, signed, and witnessed. If you wish to contest it, Mr. Bennett, you may, but I advise against it. His words were cool, clinical, but the weight of them settled like a hammer. Logan's jaw tightened, the muscles twitching, as though he might explode. His voice dropped low and dangerous. You don't get to stand there, he hissed at me, and act like this doesn't benefit you. I held his stare. I didn't ask for this. I didn't demand it. Margaret made her choice. And maybe the real reason it hurts is because deep down you know why. For the first time since the reading began, Logan faltered. His chest heaved, his hands clenching and unclenching at his sides. He looked like a man who had been stripped of his stage, his audience, his script. Sierra turned back to him, her voice rising desperate now. You told me she was going to put everything in your name. You told me we were secure. Her words cracked, and for a flicker of a second I saw her fear. She wasn't just angry at me. She was terrified of the ground crumbling beneath her, of the promise she had built her life around dissolving in real time. But I sat still. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. Because this wasn't victory. This was truth. And truth doesn't need applause. If you've ever been in a moment where the truth finally broke through, where all the lies, all the performances, all the polished facades collapsed, then you know this feeling. It's not triumph. It's not revenge. It's something colder, steadier. Tell me in the comments, have you ever watched someone face the consequences of their own lies? What did it look like for you? Sierra's face twisted, her voice sharp now, almost a plea. She didn't mean it. She couldn't have. She must have been sick, confused. She wasn't confused, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. She was clearer than she'd ever been, and she saw you both exactly as you are. Logan's face drained of color. Sierra gripped his arm, whispering frantically, but he didn't move. He just stared at me as if finally realizing Margaret's last word had landed not on him, but on me. The attorney closed the folder with deliberate care. The sound was final, like a door shutting. And in that moment, I understood Margaret hadn't just given me her estate. She had handed me her trust. And nothing Logan or Sierra did now could take that away. The attorney didn't immediately rise. He let the silence linger, thick and pulsing, with the weight of what had just been revealed. Logan's face was stone. His fists clenched so tightly the knuckles turned white. Sierra's lips parted, closed, then parted again, as if she might speak, but couldn't quite find the words to rebuild the fantasy that had shattered in front of us. The baby whimpered once, then fell quiet, the only innocent in a room brimming with unraveling pride. Finally, the attorney reached for the cream-colored envelope lying at the edge of the table. He lifted it carefully, almost reverently, as if aware that this single object carried more weight than all the notarized clauses he had just read. My name was written across it in Margaret's familiar script. Not Mrs. Bennet, not ex-wife, just me, just Camille. His voice softened. Per Margaret's instructions, this letter is to be read aloud only after the will has been disclosed. It is addressed specifically to Camille. Logan surged forward, his voice sharp. This isn't necessary. Whatever she wrote, it doesn't change the legalities. The attorney didn't look at him. He simply broke the seal with slow, steady hands. The crackle of paper filled the air, and in that sound, I swear I felt Margaret's presence slip into the room. He unfolded the pages and began to read. To my dearest Camille, if you are hearing this, then I am already gone, and you are sitting in a room I imagined many times. I want to thank you not for what you did, but for who you are. You were never just Logan's wife to me. You were family. You are family. The words struck deep. My throat tightened. I know about the betrayal, the letter continued. I know about the silence you endured out of dignity, and I know how often that silence felt like punishment you did not deserve. I saw all of it. Logan flinched. Sierra's hand flew to her mouth, but the attorney's voice carried on steady and unwavering, as if Margaret herself were speaking through him. Camille, I was proud of you. Proud of the way you stood upright when you had every reason to collapse. Proud that bitterness never stole your voice. That strength is rare, and it deserves to be protected. I didn't do this to hurt Logan. I did this because I could no longer protect the version of him I once believed in. He chose who he became, and you quietly, without recognition, chose resilience. The words wrapped around me like a shawl. They weren't dramatic. They weren't vengeful. They were steady, like Margaret had always been. You didn't ask for this inheritance, Camille, the letter said. But I chose you not to reward you, but to free you. This is not about property. It is about giving you a chance to build a life that belongs only to you. A life not defined by loss, but by the grace you carried when no one was watching. The attorney's voice faltered just slightly, then steadied again. You deserve a fresh start, and I want you to know I believe in you. When he finished, he folded the letter back into its envelope with care, setting it in front of me like a verdict. The silence that followed wasn't like before. It wasn't hostile. It wasn't dismissive. It was heavy with truth. Logan stared at the table, his jaw trembling. Sierra looked between us, searching desperately for footing that wasn't there. And me, I let the silence hold. 'Cause sometimes the most powerful voice in the room is the one that isn't even there anymore. If you've ever had someone's last words change everything, if you've ever felt the weight of truth spoken after they were gone, you know how it lingers. Stay with me, because what happens next will show you what I did with that truth. And it's not what Logan or Sierra ever expected. The envelope sat before me, Margaret's final echo of faith. And I knew this wasn't just her closing act. This was my beginning. Logan's chair creaked as he pushed it back. For the first time since I had known him, he looked small. Not polished, not in control, just a man stripped bare in front of the truth. His lips parted closed, then opened again like words were fighting to find their way past his pride. She wouldn't have done this, he muttered, his voice trembling. She always backed me, always. I lifted my eyes, meeting his, and the answer came with a clarity that startled even me. She didn't back you, Logan. She tolerated you. That's not the same thing. He froze, the words slicing deeper than anything I could have screamed. Because it wasn't anger in my voice, it was certainty. His hand raked through his hair, messing the perfect lines he had maintained since the moment I saw him under the overhang. I made mistakes, he said, the volume rising as if louder words could rebuild the ground crumbling beneath him. But you can't stand there and act like you don't benefit from this. You think this makes you better than me? No, I said quietly, my voice firm but calm. It just makes me the one she trusted. The air shifted. Sierra's eyes darted from him to me, her panic flashing in the way her hands fidgeted with the baby's blanket. She wanted him to fight harder, to claw back some sense of control. But he looked lost, like a man standing in a house that had burned down overnight. His gaze landed on me again, sharper now, almost pleading. I didn't mean to hurt you like that. But you did, I replied. Every lie. Every night you came home smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. Every time you looked me in the eyes and made me feel like I was crazy for noticing. You erased me, Logan, and now you want what closure, forgiveness, a clean slate. His jaw worked, but no words came. He had always been quick with a response, ready to spin any story. But there was no script for this moment. You weren't stupid, I continued, leaning forward slightly. You were selfish, and now you don't like the consequences. The attorney sat back in his chair, silent, as though even he understood this was no longer about the legalities. This was about truth being spoken aloud after years of silence. Logan's voice broke the edges of his control, unraveling. I've lost everything. The business is collapsing. Sierra. He glanced at her, but she didn't look back. She's leaving. She won't even let me see my son. I have nothing left. I studied him. For a fleeting second, I almost saw the man I once married, the man I once believed in. But then I remembered Margaret's words. He chose who he became. You have something, I said finally. You have exactly what you built. Choices have consequences, Logan, and you're living in them now. His shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. Please, Camille, he whispered. Don't look at me like this. I don't know who I am without you. And maybe that was the truest thing he had ever said, but it wasn't mine to fix. You'll have to figure that out, I said softly, because I won't carry it for you. The silence that followed was absolute, not the dismissive silence from earlier, not the smug silence he had once used to erase me. This silence was heavy, final. If you've ever looked someone in the eye and finally spoken the truth, you were afraid to say you know the feeling. It doesn't always come with triumph. Sometimes it comes with exhaustion, with the weight of release. Tell me, have you ever had to tell someone a truth that left no way back? What did it feel like for you? Logan lowered his head, his hands trembling against the polished table. For the first time, he looked like he understood, and for me, that was enough. Because forgiveness wasn't mine to give. The only gift left here was truth. Logan's breathing grew uneven, ragged in the heavy silence of the room. His face was pale now, drained of the confidence he carried like armor when we first walked in. I watched him try to rebuild himself in fragments, straightening his tie, flexing his hands, but it was like watching a broken mirror. The reflection would never be whole again. Finally, he looked at me, eyes glistening in a way I hadn't seen since our wedding day, when he swore vows he never meant to keep. Camille, he whispered, his voice hoarse. I was stupid. I thought I could have it all and still keep you. I thought you'd always forgive me. Please. Please don't walk away from me now. There was a time when those words would have undone me, when the idea of being needed, even after betrayal, might have been enough to drag me back into the cycle of silence. But that version of me no longer existed. I leaned forward, my voice steady. You're wrong, Logan. You weren't stupid. You were selfish. And every day you chose her over me, every lie you whispered, every moment you dismissed me, it killed something inside me. That woman you're begging for, the one who forgave you, who carried your sins on her back. She doesn't live here anymore. The attorney shifted uncomfortably, his gaze dropping to the folder as though giving us privacy. Sierra, still clutching the baby, stared wide-eyed, caught between rage and fear. But Logan just looked shattered. He shook his head, his voice breaking. I can change, I'll fix it, I'll make it right. I felt an ache deep in my chest, not for him, but for the years I had wasted believing that lie. You don't get to rewrite history now, I said quietly. You can't erase the nights I cried myself to sleep while you slipped away. You can't erase the way you made me feel invisible in my own home. You can't erase how easily you replaced me. His hands trembled against the table. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came, because deep down he knew it was true. There's nothing left to fix, I added. Not because I hate you, but because I finally see you clearly. And once you see someone clearly, you can't unsee it. The clock on the wall ticked louder than his breath. Sierra's baby whimpered, the sound of new life cutting through the death of something old. Logan pressed his palms against his face, dragging them down slowly, as though trying to wipe away the man he had become. "You're all I have left," he said finally, the desperation raw in his voice. "Sierra's already gone in her heart. The business is crumbling. Even my own son is slipping from me. Please, Camille, don't leave me with nothing." His words hit like a plea, but they rang hollow, because I wasn't responsible for what he had lost. He had built his world on lies, and now he was watching it collapse. "You don't have nothing," I said. "You have the consequences of your choices. That's not nothing, it's exactly what you earned." He looked at me like I had struck him, but my voice stayed calm, unwavering. For years I had been quiet to protect his comfort. Now my silence had turned into truth, and the truth was sharper than anything I could scream. "You keep asking me to be the woman I used to be," I continued. "But that woman is gone. She died the night you looked me in the eye and chose her. And I will never resurrect her, not for you, not for anyone." His mouth opened again, but no sound came. He sat back slowly, as though the weight of my words pressed him into the chair. His shoulders slumped, his tie loosened, his certainty gone. And for me it wasn't triumph, it wasn't revenge, it was clarity. If you've ever had to tell someone who once held your heart that you're no longer theirs to break, you know the feeling. It's not easy, it's not clean, but it is freedom. Have you ever had to shut the door on someone who thought they could always walk back into your life? Tell me in the comments. I want to know what that moment looked like for you. Logan's eyes searched mine for something: anger, pity, love, but found only resolve. He exhaled long and broken, and I knew in that moment that Margaret's gift had not just been property. It had been the courage to end this story on my terms. A week after the reading, a thick envelope landed on my apartment counter. Inside were titles, deeds, account statements, all the official proof that Margaret's choice was real. For hours I let it sit unopened, afraid of what it meant. Because accepting it wasn't just about property. It meant stepping into a life that was entirely mine, one I couldn't blame on Logan or Sierra or anyone else. When I finally peeled it open, I read every line, slowly tracing her initials in the margins, her meticulous notes. The Beacon Hill house, the cottage in Vermont, accounts that could keep me safe for the rest of my life. But one word pulled me out of the ink and paper: Willow Creek, Margaret's hometown. A place she had once told me she dreamed of returning to before society, before expectation, before the Bennett name defined her. I thought about that for days. I didn't want to live in the shadows of Beacon Hill or in a lakeside retreat that screamed of old wealth. I wanted something unpolished, something alive. So I sold the Boston property. I kept half of the proceeds, donating the other half to the Willow Creek Literacy Foundation, a cause Margaret had always spoken of with quiet pride. And then I packed. Not everything. Just what mattered: a few books, her handwritten recipes, my mother's old locket, a pair of hiking boots that still smelled faintly of pine. The rest, the gowns from galas, the antique furniture, the curated life I had lived for Logan, I left behind, because those things belonged to a woman who no longer answered to my name. When I drove into Willow Creek, the air felt different. No blaring horns, no late-night sirens, just bird song and the soft whisper of pines. The downtown strip was small, one stoplight blinking on Main Street, a diner with laminated menus, a bakery that only opened on Sundays. It wasn't polished, it wasn't perfect, and that was exactly why it felt right. On the corner stood a forgotten storefront. Dusty windows, peeling paint, a sign that once read, "Books and Brews." Most would have seen ruin. But when I cupped my hands against the glass and looked inside, I saw light hitting the back wall, saw possibility. The next morning I called the number on the faded for sale sign. By the end of the week it was mine. No agents, no inspections, just a handshake, and the quiet thrill of choosing something for no one but myself. I named it the Hearth. Not a bookstore, not a cafe, not yet, just a name. A promise. Because Hearth meant warmth, belonging, fire. A place where you gather. It wasn't legacy. It wasn't performance. It was mine. I scrubbed those floors until my fingers cracked, sanded the counters with a local carpenter who smelled of cedar, painted the walls a warm honey gold that caught the morning light like a hug. I collected mismatched chairs from flea markets, each one a little imperfect. And slowly the space began to breathe again. The menu came later, built from memory more than ambition. Margaret's apple pie recipe was the first I tested. The first 3 attempts collapsed, burned, or crumbled. But the fourth, flaky golden cinnamon-laced, tasted like every afternoon she had saved me without words. I cried into a dish towel, not from sadness, but gratitude. The grand opening wasn't grand at all. No ribbon, no banner. Just a handwritten sign that said "Open" and a bell above the door that chimed like a memory. My first customers were 2 sisters in their 70s. They came for tea, stayed for the pie, and left with something more. A piece of the story they didn't know, but felt anyway. And as I stood there that night, candlelight flickering on the counter, I realized something. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't even a comeback. This was what Margaret had given me, not through her estate, but through her faith. Permission to live a life that was entirely my own. If you've ever dreamed of starting over, not with fireworks, but with small, steady choices, you'll understand what I mean. Stay with me, because what comes next will test that new life in ways I didn't expect. The past doesn't always stay buried, and sometimes it walks right back through the door. The hearth began as a hollow space with peeling paint and mismatched chairs, but soon it took on a heartbeat of its own. Each day I unlocked the door, the bell above chimed like a promise, and people began to wander in. At first they came timidly curious about the new cafe with its honey-colored walls and the smell of cinnamon drifting into the street. But slowly they stayed, and then they returned. There was Mrs. Delaney, a widow with kind eyes who brought her knitting every Tuesday. She always ordered 1 scone and 2 cups of tea, 1 for me and 1 for Harold. She would wink, though her husband had been gone for years. There was Jeremy, a high school senior, with a tired face and a track hoodie, who ordered hot chocolate with extra whipped cream and stayed for hours hunched over his calculus homework. Hank, an older man with a golden retriever named Sadie, stopped by every morning. He never smiled, but he always placed his mug carefully on the counter before leaving and said, "Good cup." I learned their names, their rhythms, and in turn, they learned mine. They didn't ask about my past, about Logan or Sierra or Margaret's estate. To them, I wasn't a story of scandal or loss. I was just Camille, the woman with flour on her sleeves and a knack for remembering who liked their tea with honey. It was healing in ways I hadn't expected. Healing didn't arrive with fireworks or dramatic gestures. It arrived in quiet moments, the nurse who came in after night shifts and lingered over her scone. The young girl who left me a crayon drawing of the Hearth rainbow stick figures under the words, "This place feels safe." It arrived in the way people softened when they stepped inside, shedding the weight of their own storms. One rainy afternoon, I pulled out a recipe card from Margaret's old tin. Her handwriting sharp and neat, stretched across the yellowed paper, orange zest muffins double batch, add a pinch of clove. Trust me. I followed her directions, exactly, even using her old ceramic bowl. When the muffins came out, golden, still steaming, I placed them on the counter with a handwritten sign, "Margaret's muffins free today." She would have insisted. People smiled when they reached for one. A few even asked, "Who's Margaret?" "She was the one person who saw me clearly," I said softly. And no one pressed further, but I saw their eyes shift with understanding. That night I lit a single candle on the counter and sat by the window sipping chamomile tea. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was performing survival. I felt like I was living. The Hearth wasn't just a cafe. It was a place where broken pieces of people came together, and somehow in the sharing of tea and pie, those pieces began to mend. And as I watched the flame flicker, I realized Margaret had been right. She hadn't given me freedom through property. She had given it to me through belief. She had trusted me to build something from the ashes. And I had. If you've ever rebuilt yourself, not through grand gestures, but through small, steady acts, sweeping a floor, baking a pie, remembering a stranger's name, you know how powerful it can be. And if this story speaks to you, don't just listen quietly. Join me here, subscribe, be part of this community. Because healing isn't just mine, it belongs to anyone willing to begin again. Every mismatched chair, every imperfect recipe, every name written on a receipt became proof that I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was present, whole. And in those quiet mornings with the smell of cinnamon and coffee in the air, I began to believe that this was more than a fresh start. It was a resurrection. It was a Tuesday morning when the past walked back through my door. The hearth was quiet, the kind of gray, misty day where even the air felt heavy. I was wiping down the front windows, the cloth in one hand, a half-finished mug of coffee cooling behind me. The rhythm of cloth against glass had become grounding, a steady beat in my new life. That was when I saw him. At first I thought the fog was playing tricks, a figure on the sidewalk, slouched shoulders, hesitant steps. But then he stopped. Logan. No coat hair longer than I remembered his presence, smaller than it had ever been. He stood there for a long moment, staring at the door, like it might bite him. And then he pushed it open. The bell chimed the sound sharp against the hush inside. A few customers looked up curious, then returned to their coffee. But I froze. My cloth dangled in my hand, my body tense. Logan's eyes found mine instantly, the same eyes that once erased me now, hollow, desperate. Camille, he whispered almost under his breath, like saying my name could bring back the version of me who had once belonged to him. I didn't move from behind the counter. He stepped closer, hands shoved deep in his pockets, trying to look composed, but failing. "I heard you were here," he said. His gaze drifted around the cafe, taking in the honey-colored walls, the mismatched chairs, the quiet hum of music from the old radio. "You did all this?" "Yes," I answered flatly. He nodded, swallowing hard. "It's beautiful." I didn't thank him. I just waited. He shifted again, pulling at his sleeves. "I came to say I'm sorry for everything." His voice cracked on the last word, but the apology landed like a pebble thrown into an ocean. Too small, too late. There was a time, I said slowly, when those words would have meant everything, but not anymore. He flinched. "I've lost everything, Camille. The business is gone. Sierra's left. She took the baby to Austin. I haven't seen him in months. I don't have anyone left." His words poured out fast, like confession, like desperation. "That's not my problem," I replied evenly. He blinked, hurt flashing across his face. "That's not fair." I set the cloth down, stepping out from behind the counter until only a few feet separated us. Fair was me waiting at home, night after night while you lied to my face. Fair was me folding your laundry while you played house with someone else. You don't get to come here, now, and beg for fairness. His voice broke. "I thought maybe if you saw me, if you saw what I've lost, there could still be a chance." I shook my head. "No chance. Not anymore." His lips trembled. For once, Logan didn't look polished or proud. He looked broken. "I don't know who I am without you." I drew in a long breath, steady. "That's something you'll have to figure out. Because I won't carry it for you." The bell above the door chimed again as a young couple walked in, their laughter filling the space with warmth. Logan stepped back, startled, his shadow shrinking in the light of ordinary life moving forward without him. He looked back at me one last time, eyes wet, voice low. "So that's it. That's closure." I nodded. "Yes, you came. You saw. Now you leave." For a moment I thought he'd argue, beg again, but instead he just stood there, shoulders slumped, before turning toward the door. The bell chimed once more as he walked out into the mist, and I stood there, my chest steady, not broken. Because this time I didn't crumble, I didn't bend, I didn't forgive. I was no longer the woman who once existed in the shadow of his lies. If you've ever had to close the door on someone who once defined you, you know the weight of it. And maybe you've done it too, looked someone in the eye and said no for the first and final time. Share that moment with me. Because stories like these aren't just mine, they're ours. Logan's footsteps faded into the fog, and for the first time I felt the silence not as absence, but as freedom. The morning after Logan walked out of the hearth, I woke before the sun. The sky outside was a pale wash of gray, that hushed hour between night and day when everything feels suspended. I padded barefoot across the wooden floor, the boards warm under my steps, and began the quiet ritual I had built for myself. Straightening chairs, folding napkins, measuring flour with hands that no longer shook. There was no shadow of Logan in my mind, no echo of his voice trailing after me. Only stillness, only clarity. The hum of the cafe wasn't about survival anymore. It was about life mine whole and untethered. As I whisked cinnamon into batter, Ella Fitzgerald's voice floated from the old radio, a soft jazz tune that wrapped the kitchen in warmth. I caught my reflection in the oven door. Hair tied up apron, dusted with flour, eyes clear. And I smiled not the practice smile I once gave at galas, but a private one, the kind you only give yourself when you realize you've made it through. Healing, I discovered, hadn't come in thunderclaps or dramatic gestures. It hadn't arrived in Margaret's will alone or even in Logan's collapse. It had come in small, steady things, in the college student who designed a logo for the shop without asking for payment, in the toddler who sang the alphabet song to her muffin, in the widow who ordered tea for herself and her husband who wasn't there, in the rosebush behind the cafe that refused to bloom all season until one day it did. I began to understand what Margaret had meant when she said, "Maybe it's time someone carried your weight for you." She hadn't meant inheritance. She had meant faith, the kind of faith that lets you step into a new story without asking permission. That afternoon, I pulled a faded photo from beneath the counter. Margaret and I in her kitchen flour, streaking our aprons, laughter frozen in time. She had insisted we take it. "You'll need reminders," she'd said. God, she was right. I propped it near the register where sunlight could catch it. Customers noticed sometimes. "Is that your mom?" they asked. "Yes," I always said, and in every way that mattered it was true. The Hearth became more than a cafe. It became proof that broken things can be remade not into what they were, but into something stronger. I wasn't Logan's ex-wife. I wasn't a woman erased by betrayal. I was Camille Bennett, owner of the Hearth, keeper of a space where people brought their stories and left a little lighter than when they came. And on evenings when I closed the shop, the scent of cinnamon still hanging in the air, I sat by the window with chamomile tea and listened to the quiet. Sometimes I swore I could feel Margaret there, not as a ghost, but in the stillness, in the way the world seemed to align when I chose myself. If you've ever had to burn down the blueprint of your life and rebuild from ashes, you know this truth: starting over isn't weakness. It's the strongest thing you'll ever do. And if you've walked this road, to subscribe and stay here with me, because this channel is where we share those stories, the ones that remind us freedom isn't given, it's chosen. And if you want to see how others reclaimed their lives, don't miss the next story waiting for you. The last leaves of autumn swirled across the doorstep as I flipped the sign to closed. The Hearth glowed behind me, steady, alive. And for the first time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for life to begin again. I was already living it. When I look back now, it amazes me how a story that began in rain and silence could end in warmth and light. For so long, I thought freedom would feel like thunder, like walking out of a courtroom victorious, or slamming a door on someone who had betrayed me. But freedom wasn't loud. It was gentle. It came in steady breaths and the rhythm of a cafe bell, in the quiet of a rose finally blooming after months of waiting. The Hearth isn't just a shop anymore. It's a reflection of what happens when we stop asking to be chosen and start choosing ourselves. Every cup of tea I pour, every recipe I recreate from Margaret's handwriting, every conversation that lingers over pie, it's all proof that healing doesn't erase scars. It grows around them stronger than what broke before. Some evenings I sit in the garden behind the cafe, the herbs and daisies swaying in the twilight breeze. The stubborn rosebush blooms more often now, and I can't help but smile at it. It reminds me of Margaret and of myself. Resilient, quiet, still here. I no longer wonder if Logan regrets losing me. That's his story to live, his burden to carry. Mine is different. Mine is about turning rubble into roots, about finding beauty in small, ordinary moments, about honoring the faith someone placed in me by living fully. And maybe that's what I want to leave with you. Starting over isn't about forgetting who hurt you. It's about remembering who you are without them. This life, the one I'm living right now, it isn't borrowed. It isn't conditional. It's mine. And that is enough.